Welcome to the Farming Without the Bank podcast, the show with a no BS approach to money, hosted by a farm strategy expert and authorized IBC practitioner. Join us as we get real and expose the flaws of traditional financial institutions in order to help farmers take control of their finances, create peace of mind, grow their wealth, and leave a legacy. Now, here's your host, Mary Jo Ehrman.
Hello, and welcome back to the podcast. Thank you very much for being here. I appreciate it. Oh, all you loyal listeners. It never gets old, but it's always surprising. It is at least a couple of times a week where people will say, all right, I'm into episode 180 or I've listened for months on end and I'm just catching up and whatever. And I'm still just amazed at the fact that so many of you can just listen in such large quantities. I don't know. I guess I'm doing it right now with a podcast that I really like. So I get it. It's just, I think I'd be annoyed with myself. Okay. So today we are going to talk about tax returns being lies. And so when you guys have a first meeting with me, I want numbers. I want to know what your gross income is, what your net worth is. I want to know what your total expenses are. I don't want to know your net worth. We do need to know that if you do a policy, but I want to know your gross income. I want to know your total expenses, and I do not want your tax return. This happens a lot where people will come into the first meeting and they don't know their numbers. They're not keeping track of their numbers. They don't have anything in QuickBooks. They have no idea what their numbers are. They just give all of their receipts to their CPA, and their CPA files their tax return. And so when I get to a meeting, they pull out their tax return. I don't want your tax return. I want QuickBooks. I want a profit and loss statement. I don't want your tax return, because your tax return is going to have depreciation on it. Your tax return is going to have living expenses in it. And if we're looking at farm expenses are not living expenses. I know that's how the bank wants it. The bank wants to know how much do you need for living because that's what you want to borrow. No. You should not be borrowing money to live. Living should come off of your gross or your net profit. So many people do not understand that, and they come in with their tax return. Well, I'm not the IRS, so I don't care what your tax return says. For the IRS, you're trying to make as little money as possible, which means if I was the IRS and I used your tax return, you wouldn't have any money for a policy. Okay? Then the banker wants your balance sheet. Well, I don't want your balance sheet because I don't really care what your net worth is. The insurance company cares what your net worth is when it comes time to insure you, but I don't care what your net worth is because I can't get access to money that is equity without you going to the bank and borrowing against it. And oh my gosh, that is a whole podcast I did a while back about why you should not be going to the bank, borrowing against your land and buying life insurance with that money. I don't remember what episode it is, but it's back there. And so if that is something you're doing, and I'm not your agent because you wouldn't be my client if you were doing it. But if somebody has talked you into that because some of that crap is going on, then you need to go back and listen to that podcast. I can only imagine today what's happening in those situations with 9% interest. Okay, I digress. So I don't want your balance sheet because I don't care about what your combine is worth and what your land is worth. I don't care about the equity in it. I care about your net profit. And I want to see what the expenses are. If you have a corporation, I want to know what payroll is to everybody because payroll is an expense. But if you're the same person that owns it, how much of that expense is coming back to you in the form of payroll? If you own the building personally and you're renting the building to the corporation, I want to know how much rent you're charging because that's coming back to you. I want to know what all of your loans are, what you owe, what your payment is. Are you paying extra on any of that stuff? I want to know where your money's being invested. Is it savings? Is it 401ks? Is it IRAs? How much is going there? I want to know how much life insurance you have. This all takes like an hour in a meeting. But what I never want to see is a tax return. Again, if you write a ginormous policy over $15 million a death benefit, the life insurance company wants to see a tax return. I don't really care. So if you don't know your numbers outside of the tax return, why? Why don't you know what your inputs cost? How do you know what your break even is? I just had this conversation with somebody last week. And I said, "Well, what's your break even?" And he said, "Well, I don't know yet." I said, "What do you mean you don't know yet? It's the end of the year. How do you know what you're going to sell grain for if you don't know what your inputs are? You should have known per acre what it was going to cost you to do everything before you even planted." Let me tell y'all a secret. Your big operations know their numbers. So I get super, super defensive of big operations when people get mad at them for getting big and buying everything up. Okay, if you are not that big, do you know your numbers? I frankly don't care if you have 1 acre of ground. I don't care if you have 25 chickens and you're selling eggs. What are your numbers? What did it cost you to raise those chickens? What did you make in egg sales? If you don't know that, you're not keeping your books. How are you supposed to get better every year without knowing your break even? How do you know if the chicken business is paying the bills? Most of you will say, "Well, it's just not. We're just barely breaking even every year on the tax return." I don't care what the tax return says. You want to look like you're making $0 for the IRS. That's your ultimate goal. That's what you pay the accountant for. So you can go buy things to avoid paying taxes, which is a whole nother sore subject for me. But don't think that you can look at your tax return and make a business decision off of that. I file my taxes, I look at my tax return to make sure everything is on there that can possibly be deducted. And after that, I don't ever use that tax return again. Completely pointless because I have a balance sheet and I have a profit and loss statement. And the only person that's ever going to need the balance sheet is the bank. And I don't hardly ever use the bank. So the bank doesn't need the balance sheet when I go buy a vehicle, right? The only time is if I'm going to buy land, then they might want my balance sheet. But outside of that, they're not going to need it. I'm not going to need it. So what do I use? My profit and loss. And if you don't know what a profit and loss is, then you can Google it and you can educate yourself on it. But you need to know what your gross income is. I love to get my numbers down. Over the weekend, I broke down all of my numbers per client. What is my average income per client? How much can I afford for raises for my staff? What else can I spend money on? How much did I spend money on for marketing? How much did I pay this person? How much did I pay that person? I want that all broke down because I want to see what is producing income and what is not producing income. And if I am spending a bunch of money on marketing and that's not producing income, then why do I keep doing it? So if you're spending a whole bunch of money on fertilizer and you don't need that much fertilizer, why do you keep doing it? How do you know? The tax return is an absolute lie that you are looking at and trying to figure out how you're doing. What did you average for income on grain and cattle over the last 3, 5, 10, 15 years? What's the average? What is your average for cost of inputs? Are you making money on the average? What years were bad and why were they bad? Because you might have an average come down. I had one year when I was averaging all my stuff out over the weekend, I had one year that was just astronomical. And I thought, well, what the world? Why was that year so good? And I was doing all this numbering in the living room. And my husband said, oh, you had blah, blah, blah that year. And I totally forgot about it. And so I looked through all my client list and yep, I had one really large premium case. And so that brought my average up. That's false. That's false. Those cases are rare that you're going to have $1 million, $500,000, 200,000. Those are rare cases, especially for me. They're not rare for some people because some people like to go after the big dogs. I like to stay with my, smaller cases, good people. That's how I look at it. I write a lot more business compared to most because I like to keep my policies where they are comfortable and I don't like to push people. But you have to look at that. Were cattle prices really, really high? Did you have some sort of an inheritance? What caused this huge spike? Did you actually contract grain versus just hauling it to the elevator? Did you actually know your inputs versus not knowing your inputs? You have to be able to analyze that stuff. And if you can't analyze it, then how do you know where you're at? Tax return is a lie. It's really good for the IRS, and it's only a form you are going to look at when you pay your taxes. You cannot run your business off of it. There, I said it, I'm done. Please don't bring those numbers to me in a meeting. If you're going to set up a meeting with me, I would prefer to have your profit and loss numbers. If you don't have a profit and loss statement because you don't keep your numbers, what was your gross income? What were your total expenses? Those are the things that are important. How much money did you make from the sale of grain, cattle, eggs, chickens? I don't care what it is that you're doing. If you sold it and it produced income, what does that total? Then, what are your total expenses? Fuel, fertilizer, seed, chemical, feed, vet bills, loan payments, interest. What were your total expenses? Anything that you paid for that was farm related, not living expenses, because you should be making enough money to pay for your living expenses. If you want to include it so you know what you should be selling grain for, that's great. That's absolutely super smart. But I don't want it in there as an expense because that wasn't the cost of doing business. What you sold, what you paid somebody else. Those are the two big things that you need to see. Then the rest all kind of falls into place when I go over the numbers for you. All right. If you guys are not listening to the Without the Bank podcast, go to your podcast app and look at your Without the Bank podcast. Add it. I am not doing duplicate podcasts, but I have podcasts in both spots. And so they're not going to be running on one another anymore. So make sure that you are listening to both of them. Okay? I talked about on the Without the Bank podcast for this week, we talked about lazy investors. Are you a lazy investor? 401ks, IRAs, all that kind of stuff. And so if you're putting money into a 401k, if somebody is telling you you should be putting money into a 401k, you might want to go over there and have a listen. So many of you listen to these when they come out in my email. So all of my podcasts go to my email list. If you are listening to them on email, and that's great, fantastic. But there are podcast apps that you can get on your smartphone if you have a smartphone. There are podcast apps that you can get there. And so it might be easier for you to listen there instead of having to listen on your computer. Or you can go to YouTube, I guess, too. That's fine. But Google Podcasts does not allow me to put the Without the Bank podcast on there. So you might not want to use the Google Podcast app. But outside of that, all is fantastic. Listen to both of them, please, and thank you. All right, let me know if there is absolutely anything you need. MaryJo@withoutthebank.com or themjhotline.com. You can leave me a little voice concern. I would love it. All right, you guys, have a fantastic rest of your day.
Thanks for listening to the Farming Without the Bank podcast. We hope today's episode has inspired you to take control of your finances in new ways. Don't forget to check out our website, farmingwithoutthebank.com, and engage with us on our Facebook page, Farming Without the Bank. Join us next week as we smash more financial myths and empower you to accomplish your financial goals.